Welcome back to the Energy Innovation Days. My name is Radermacher. I have the privilege to be responsible for sustainability at E.ON, and it's my pleasure to be the host of the new session now on nothing smaller than the restoration of our planet. Now, climate change and the loss of biodiversity not only are two of the most pressing issues of our time, they have something else in common. They share a common solution. And with this, we want to discuss how nature-based solutions and ecosystem restoration play a role in combating these challenges. It's my pleasure to not have to do this alone today. I have two explicit experts with me today. And to my right, I have Lubomila Jordanova, CEO and co-founder of PlanA. And what PlanA is about, you will share with us in a second. Lubomila has received quite some awards in the last years, namely Forbes 30 Under 30, and also named Top 50 Women in Tech by Handelsblatt most recently. So it's my pleasure that you're here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And with us in Nairobi, Kenya, Tim Christophersen, head of Nature for Climate branch at the UN Environmental Programme. And in his role, Tim is also the chair of a global partnership of more than 30 leading organizations, governments, the World Bank, the UN, and also corporates. Thank you, Tim, for being here with us today.
Pleasure.
Now, I said it, biodiversity loss and climate change reinforce each other. They're not separate threats, they are closely interlinked. Tim, it feels to me that we still talk a lot in public about the cost of action rather than the cost of inaction. Can you share with us what is at risk?
Thank you, David. And at risk is nothing less than the foundations of our global civilization. If we look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, you see progress towards some of them, but progress towards all the SDGs is now limited by what we call the planetary boundaries. And the most important ones of the planetary boundaries, you mentioned that, are climate change and the increasing ecological collapse, or the biodiversity loss that we've seen over the past decades, but we've seen accelerate over the past few years. So biodiversity loss together with climate change create a perfect storm that might hit us hard enough, and is already hitting some parts of our society, some countries, some regions, even in Germany, hard enough to shake the foundations of a stable society. So what is at risk is not only the foundation of our economy, but the foundation of this human experiment that has progressed to a stage where, for the first time in human history, we can call ourselves a truly global civilization. But that is now at risk.
Thank you. That sounds not only challenging, but almost depressing. Now, Lubomila, you founded PlanA. You stepped out of your previous role on your career track to create impact, to make a difference. How did that go, and what is PlanA about?
In 2016, I got exposed to the reality of climate change by actually cleaning a beach instead of surfing for a week. And that shook me enough to make me decide that probably there's no better use of my skills than actually working on the biggest challenge that humanity has ever faced, this collection of issues called climate change. It was an interesting journey because 2016 wasn't the year when everyone was talking about climate change. So it felt like there was a lot of wind to be battled and a lot of discussions to be held in a very educational manner. It was not about thinking of solutions. It was more like, is there actually a problem? Today, PlanA is a company that supports corporates on their journey to decarbonize. We have a software as a service platform that processes complex data, then streamlines all of this into a dashboard, which then gives you an idea on how you can go on a net zero journey with an automatically generated plan. we work with corporates to really embed in their mindset that it's really not only about disclosure, it's really about understanding that we are facing a system collapse, an ecosystem collapse that is essentially built upon the choices that we've been making on a daily basis. And essentially this is how also our product is developed.
Sounds great. We talk a lot about decarbonization and reducing CO2. You said you want to support companies on their path to net zero. What role do nature-based solutions play in this?
I think we need to look at the meta picture in order to understand the role of nature. We actually have been, for the last few decades, living in a manner as if we're managers of this ecosystem, as if we're on top and essentially decide how the flows of nature operate. The truth is we're not, and we see it with all of these unfortunate events that also Tim was mentioning, where our nature is allowing us to really quickly learn that we are standing at the moment against, not with, forces that are beyond our capacity to respond to. And what this requires is a really systemic, but also fundamentally changing our mindset approach that gives us an idea of where do we fit within this whole big picture. To me, nature is the biggest teacher that we can have. We can learn a lot about how we can efficiently eliminate waste. We can learn a lot about how we can collaborate, how we can benefit from the capacities and the skills and the advantages of others, while, of course, focusing on the things that we're good at. And finally, it's also about understanding that there is a natural flow of things, right. Which is not based on the profit margins that you have essentially set yourself for this quarter, but rather on one that is working in correlations with all the other stakeholders involved in the play that you're part of.
Now, Tim, you launched most recently the Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And Antonio Gutierrez put it in his words, 2021 is the year to reconcile humanity with nature. What role does ecosystem restoration play in tackling these challenges? We can't hear you.
And indeed, the UN Secretary General put a challenge before all of us to end the war with nature or to make peace with nature. And that is also the overarching vision of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. It is a new relationship between humanity and nature because we've come to the end of the road that we know, and we now have to chart a new way forward that does not pitch us against nature, but lets us restore nature's productive capacity, lets us restore biodiversity, lets us solve about a third of the climate mitigation gap that we currently have. And the next 10 years will be decisive. On the positive side, we see a lot of interest in nature-based solutions, in climate action in general, but in nature-based solutions that go beyond only being a solution for the climate. Nature-based solutions have so many other benefits, like providing stable livelihoods, green jobs, increasing the productivity of agriculture. They can contribute to peace and stability at a regional level. So there's so many benefits that we can see. And of course, nature-based solutions also have a key connection to the energy sector, since we're at the Energy Innovation Days. If I look at the country where I live, Kenya, about 40% of electricity here comes from hydropower. And recently, because of deforestation in what we call the water towers of Kenya, there's been a lot of siltation in the hydropower dams, which has severely reduced Kenya's ability to produce green energy. So we need, for example, ecosystem restoration in the highlands of Kenya to ensure Kenya's energy independence and the shift away from fossil fuel energy to renewables. So there's a clear link between restoration and energy that goes even further if we look at all of Africa, where in sub-Saharan Africa, about 90% of all households rely on wood fuel for their domestic electricity needs. And this needs to be replaced with a decentralized, renewable probably solar energy grid that has intelligent grid solutions at its base. So we need to look at energy also as a way to pave the way for ecosystem restoration at a large scale.
Great. Now you mentioned the challenges that Kenya is facing. And when Western corporates strive to take action with nature-based solutions, this is a lot about afforestation, for example. But now we also see the LEAF Coalition, which has most recently been established as a public-private partnership between the US administration under President Biden, also the UK government and the Norwegian government, together with now 13 corporates, including E.ON. And the LEAF Coalition strives to mobilize $1 billion of forest finance, so the protection of tropical and subtropical rainforests, also in Kenya. What role do you see for this kind of public-private partnerships going forward?
They will be increasingly important, and we will also see that at COP26 in Glasgow as more of these partnerships emerge successfully. You mentioned the LEAF Coalition, there are others. Overall, with the UN RED program, which is the UN's collaborative program to address reducing deforestation and forest degradation under Article 5 of the Paris Agreement, we aim for 1 green gigaton per year by 2025 from forests, either from the conservation of forests or from forest restoration. If you broaden this to other ecosystems, including wetlands, peatlands, coastal ecosystems, there's certainly a lot more scope. We do have some work left to do, though, to ensure that especially the voluntary carbon markets scale up in a way that avoids greenwashing and using offsets as an excuse. So nature-based excuses instead of nature-based solutions, which is certainly would be counterproductive. But if the rules are becoming clear enough and there's enough transparency in the system, then offsets will be a key part of the solution also in those public-private partnerships.
Mm-hmm. Now we talked about the platform service as a or platform as a service that you're providing. Also, the UN Decade provides a platform for global players to take action. What hinders companies, corporates, your customers to take more decisive action? What are the challenges they're facing?
The challenges that we've seen over the last years of working with corporates have been, first of all, related to education. Mm-hmm. The second challenge has been related to third-party engagement. And then the final one is actually embedding sustainability as part of the top agenda. On the first topic, education is kind of a fundamental challenge, I think, that we have across the whole spectrum of climate change-related discussions, where essentially we don't necessarily understand the fundamental problem that we're having to deal with. As it was rightfully just mentioned, it's not about offsets, it's not about just compensation, it's really about systemic shifts and also embedding a different mindset in the way we work. This education does not necessarily come in a package to the employees or to the stakeholders involved in this organization, like anyone that falls within Scope 3, which makes it really difficult for any change to be instigated by any other stakeholder beyond those that maybe are sitting within the sustainability team or in the boardroom, for those boardrooms that actually are awake to the problem. In terms of the engagement of third parties, I'm sure the audience is informed on how we calculate emissions or how we look into calculating impacts in one way or another. A company does not work in isolation. You're always connected to other organizations, be it because they're your suppliers of the things that you eat in your office or you deliver as a merchandise or as products and the parts that build it, be it your employees. And at this stage, what we've seen with a lot of corporates is that kind of sustainability is a patched up solution that just sits within a certain department, but it's not really deeply embedded into all of these different engagements that exist outside of this one informed circle. And then the final one that is kind of a bit more focused on this larger perspective on, the third-party engagement, but maybe the more meta level of like, how do we really embed sustainability into the mindset in the impact assessment? There we have a challenge with really speaking the same language across the different stakeholders. So these coalitions that were mentioned, there's so many of them, and it's really fantastic to see that we have this kind of collaborative approach. The problem is that quite often we're running a marathon that is going in a different direction that doesn't necessarily lead to the same outcome that we're seeking.
Right. What role does innovation play internally in terms of providing platforms, creating transparency, lifting or unleashing the potential through AI, for example?
I think innovation has a large part to play for the future because we just don't have time. And this is where we can benefit from process optimization that leads to reduced waste, where we can embed some natural patterns into the way we work and we do things in our companies. But this is also a double-edged sword. Like, we should not have this solutionism mind where we think that technology is going to fix it all. I know many of us are familiar with carbon capture as a solution, and quite often it gets to be exposed as the one that is actually going to fix it all. Today there was a lot of coverage of the fact that we don't have, for example, any solutions on methane capture. There's also a lot of actually data that shows that with the current capacity of the carbon capture facilities that exist out there, we can't even cover a small or mid-sized country in terms of the emissions that they create. So I think innovation is a fix, it's an opportunity, it is an optimization of our sustainability strategy as a society, but it's one that would require also for us to face really the facts, which is nature is tired, it's impatient, and it needs to see us starting to respond to all the signals that we're getting.
We called this session 10 more years to restore our planet. I want to ask both of you, what has to happen in the next years so we fulfill this ambition, we live up to this ambition, both on a corporate side, your customer side, but also on the political side ahead of COP26? Tim, do you want to start? What do you expect from COP26?
So what needs to happen is there's a lot of inertia in the system that we currently have, in the economic and in the political system. If you look at fossil fuel subsidies, for example, we still spend up to $500 billion per year on making oil, coal, and gas cheaper and more widely available at a time when this is the worst possible thing we can do. But because there's so much inertia in the way we are used to doing things, including in politics, this is at the moment just on a track to continue because nobody can really imagine how to restructure a system like that. If you look at agriculture subsidies, which are often detrimental to nature, the picture is similar. $470 billion per year cause harm to either the climate, biodiversity, human health, markets, or all of them. And that amount of government spending has to radically change and has to change very quickly. So inertia is the first thing that we need to overcome. And I hope that with the push at COP26 and also the push we see from youth activists, from civil society, that this inertia will be overcome. The second thing that needs to happen clearly is that we need a better understanding globally of the limited natural resources that we have on this planet and how to better manage them. If you think about ecology as something that is not just a word, but actually a word that has the same root as economy. Both come from the ancient Greek word of oikos, which means our household or our common home. And the economy is the management of that common home, but ecology is the knowledge of it. So we're managing at the moment the planet without any knowledge of, or without sufficient knowledge of how to do it, as Lubomila also said. So we also need a much better understanding and awareness of what our role and what our relationship with nature is on this planet. But that is a longer term effort. So it's good we have a 10-year decade to shift that perspective of humanity's relationship with nature.
Before we go into Q&A, what's your view on this? What do you expect?
I always feel like when we put these deadlines of 10 years, we kind of allow ourselves to feel a bit too comfortable. So I would maybe share my ambition for the next 5 years, because then if we fail miserably, then we have 5 years of sense of urgency, which not going to shift a lot, but still maybe are going to allow us to be even more effective. For me, the three key components are essentially collaboration, the second one is investment, and then the third one is related to the Global South. On collaboration, I think for anyone that is familiar with even the basics of the topic of climate change, it is evident that the only way we have out of this situation is really being engaged with everyone else's activities on the topic and seeing how we can find solutions in the scientific, in the NGO sphere, in the business sphere, and in the governmental side of the story, but really finding ways to work together. And that is something that at the moment is still significantly missing. The second one, which is related to investment, is, of course, I'm going to maybe selfishly say that we need innovation in green technology. At the moment, this accounts for less than 3% of the total amount of venture capital funding. I think this is appalling. If we know that this is essentially going to result in a failing planet that where business is not even going to be possible to be made, maybe we should be putting effort and money into really starting to test and experiment with different solutions that then we can scale to a level where we can see them really driving the agenda in an optimized and kind of satisfying for all way. And then the final one is on the Global South. I think what I fail sometimes to see in all of these discussions that I'm part of and also I observe on the sidelines is this perspective of the Western society having a really deep understanding of what's happening and how we can shift our own agenda, but sometimes forgetting that there's actually, first of all, part of the planet that is going to be affected a lot faster than us and is already affected by climate change. And it's one on which we heavily rely to be able to produce, to get a lot of our natural resources, which we can argue in a separate session whether we need them in the same quantities as we do today. But I think we need to find a more equitable approach to talking about sustainability, which encompasses the perspectives of many. I'm looking forward to COP. I'm super excited to be speaking there, and also I know all of us are going to be there. I think it's been 2 years of waiting for many of us where we know that the key stakeholders are going to be there, and I can say with a lot of hope that I've seen a lot of sense of urgency by all the phone calls that I'm getting from banks, asset managers and others, which clearly understand that this is a deadline for them to make a commitment.
Absolutely. Now I'd like to involve our audience, and we have the first question coming in. It's to you again. How can you foster cultural change in companies in practice?
I think the main challenge with achieving cultural change is related to facing the fact that sustainability is a process. It's not something that happens overnight. In the same manner that if your company has been having some unequal practices, you can't become all of a sudden like a company that is the most equitable just because there's certain mindsets embedded into many of the employees. Is the same when it comes to sustainability. When we're looking into embedding it, I think first of all it's related to the fact that you need to sit everyone down around the table, and that means everyone, not only the management, but up until the intern and anyone that is involved on an internal level in the company, and make a commitment. Make a commitment that you are willing to change, and you would need everyone's contribution for this to happen. The second stage is to actually put a plan. We've spoken extensively with you of how much effort it took you to get the company to where it is today, and massive congratulations, because I know how much effort it takes, having worked with so many different companies that have had to go through such a challenging journey. And then the final part is when you have built yourself to be a sustainable leader, a pioneer, is to set the example for others in a more open manner. It's totally okay to shout out about what you've achieved. Yep. We've had one case where a client, a football club, basically said, until we don't achieve it all, we're never going to be able to communicate it. I don't think this is the way forward.
Absolutely. Now, final question to you, Tim. Is there a closer collaboration needed between first and third world? And you talked about the global south to reach climate goals. If so, what needs to be done to foster this collaboration? You've got 30 seconds.
Well, in the UN, we don't use those terms. We live in one world. But if this is related to developed and developing countries, of course, this can only move forward in partnership. And the current crisis we see of climate change is also causing a crisis of the multilateral system at a time when we most need international collaboration. So bridging this financing gap that exists, that is a big obstacle to COP26, bridging the technology transfer gap where private sector can play a big part, that is certainly needed more than ever now. We need a global solution because climate change is a global problem.
I think that's perfect final words. Thank you so much. I think it was clear to all of us that this is a global challenge. We're a global society. We're in this together, but we can solve this together. And with this, thank you for being part of the session. Thank you, Lubomila. Thank you, Tim. And now we are entering into a short break before we continue with the Energy Innovation Days. Thank you.
Thank you.